Hello and welcome to Exploring Education. Today we have a compelling show with a phenomenal guest, Mr. Denny Abbott. It's not often that I can share the set with someone who is not only someone I've known for a long time, but someone I consider to be a good friend. And I will tell you that Denny Abbott is also a career advocate for the underserved and people who have no voice. Saying that, the cover that you have seen here full screen is of a book that Denny finally wrote, because I've been on him that he needed to tell this story, called They Had No Voice. And when we come back, you'll get an opportunity to find out a little bit more about Denny, a lot more about the book, and really understand how one person can make a major difference in life. So please don't go far. We're back. Welcome back. We're here with Denny Abbott, who has authored a book called They Had No Voice. More importantly than writing the book, you actually live the experiences in the book. Welcome to the show, Denny. And
Thank you so
thank
much.
you
Thank
for
you for
taking time, absolutely, to come and share the story with us. Of course, at the time that you experienced these things, you probably were not thinking, oh, one of these days I'll write a book. Tell us what compelled you to actually live this life. Tell us a little bit about what the book is about so people can understand why it's so compelling that you would take the time to sit down and write it.
I started out my career at age 21 as a probation officer with the juvenile court in Montgomery, Alabama, right out of college. Okay. And I was supervising delinquent children, many of them almost as old as I was, up to age 18, so I was about 3 years older than some of the kids I was supervising. Right. But I came to know about conditions in a state institution called Mount Meigs, which is located in Montgomery County, which is the county where I was, but it was a state facility nonetheless. Okay. And it was at that time, and this was as we moved forward into the late 60s, the facility was still segregated. Okay. Black children who were committed by the courts went to this Mount Meigs facility, both boys and girls, okay. And the white children went to Birmingham. But I'd heard about abuses at this particular institution, and I tried to get administrative relief for the kids out there, because I'd heard too many things from kids who'd been there not to believe they were telling me the truth. I knew that they were. So when you say administrative relief, that's really the corporate speak, if you will, for you try to go through the established processes. Exactly right. Okay. You call people, you write memos, you document it in the file, right. And you follow up and say, what did you do with this complaint? Right. And every time the complaints came back unfounded. Okay. Kids were making it up, they're exaggerated, this didn't happen. Okay. And then one day in 1969, I was in my office, and my secretary told me that 5 girls wanted to see me who had just been released from this institution in Mount Meigs. Okay. And I didn't have an appointment with them or anything. They just showed up. So I agreed to talk to them, of course. And they told me some really horrifying things about what had happened to them there. One girl was held in boiling water, and she showed me the burn marks on her arm. Several had scars where they'd been beaten badly with fan belts and hose and mop handles and all of those kinds of things. One girl was beaten so badly that she miscarried while she was out there. She was pregnant when she got there and ultimately miscarried. And, I had gotten to the point where I knew that administrative relief was not going to come from a segregated system in Alabama who didn't care because they were black children, and nobody cared, and I knew that nothing else was going to happen. So I got to stop and ask you this. Why did you care? Well, I went home that night, and I had 3 children at the time in elementary school. And as I hugged my children that night, and I saw that they were in a safe environment, they were in a home that loved them, that people cared about them, and I thought about those kids at this institution who had none of that. And they could have been my children there too. And I'm thinking, how can I truly love my own children without caring about these other kids. I mean, I don't think you can do that without being a disservice to your own children. Mm-hmm. So I knew that I had to do something. I just couldn't, continue. So I found a friend of mine who was a lawyer, who later became the U.S. attorney, and after that became a federal judge, by the way. And he also knew about Mount Meigs, and we concluded the only way that we were going to change anything was to file a federal court class action lawsuit.
Oh, my goodness.
If we had filed in state courts, we would have gotten nowhere. So we went into federal court, and there was a very courageous federal court judge at the time, Frank Johnson, Jr., who's very well known for civil rights decisions. And so we filed the lawsuit, and it started from there.
How did you arrive at that conclusion? I mean, as you sit here, it just kind of rolls out. But I've got to believe that you had to think, reflect, pray long and hard, because this was not a decision to be taken lightly. Once it was out there, it was going to truly be out there.
Well, particularly in that environment, which was still, as I say, very much segregated. But I talked to my wife about it. We even talked to the kids about it. We said there are going to be repercussions from this, and everybody needs to understand that going in. And everybody was supportive, even my 3 little children and my wife. And but there were repercussions, and we had neighbors that we'd known for a long time stop talking to us. Shopkeepers didn't want to wait on us anymore.
Wow.
My children were taunted at school. I got suspended from my job for doing that. I worked for a racist judge, and he wanted to make an example, I think. And so, yeah, there were repercussions, but we were prepared for that. We knew that was going to happen.
Okay. So then what happened?
Well,
did you get the relief that you envisioned?
We did. And as a matter of fact, the U.S. Justice Department came into the case as a friend of us as the plaintiffs. Okay. And they sent a team of FBI agents to the school.
Wow.
And got all the evidence we needed, and depositions galore, and photographs, and records of kids being horribly abused. And because this was nothing but a slave camp. Okay. And let me just tell you why I say that.
Please.
This institution was totally for farming. If you'll see on the cover of the book, there's kids lined up ready to go into the fields to work at dawn. Okay. And most of them had no shoes on. They wore hand-me-down Army fatigues.
And what age range are we talking?
12 up to 18.
Okay, 12 to 18.
And the other thing that really concerned me a lot was that the entire institution was black. All the children were black, and all the staff were black. There was not a white person out there, except that the governing board of that institution was made up of white landowners who surrounded the institution. And when it came time to have their crops harvested, they picked up the phone and called the superintendent, who, there's no other way to say this, he was an Uncle Tom kind of guy. Right. And they would load up all these kids using state equipment and go harvest the crops for nothing with these white landowners. But the other tragedy of this was the physical abuse of kids. It was just unspeakable. And a lot of them had to be hospitalized. These kids had no reform programs whatsoever. They had no education. They had no social services. They had no vocational rehab programs. They had no medical care. A 15-year-old did the stitching up of another kid out there who had to be stitched because of being beat up so badly. And it was nothing more than a slave camp.
And that you just answered all the questions I was going to ask you about rehabilitation, education. Now
none of that.
Have a few minutes before we have to go to a break. And actually, as you describe all that, we had a chance to speak with Palm Beach County Commissioner Priscilla Taylor, who shared with us her thoughts about the significance of this book compared to modern-day Palm Beach County. So let's hear what she had to say.
The book's main point to me is lessons learned, because if we do not listen and observe what happened in the past, we're more likely to repeat it in the future. The kids at Meigs actually did not speak, and the voice that was supposed to be there for them did not speak. And luckily, 3 girls took it upon themselves to go to Denny and tell him about what was going on at that school. If they had never felt comfortable, Lord knows what would have happened at Meg's Institute. Even though he intervened, a lot of things had already gone awry. So I really feel that the lessons learned is that we must listen and we must look forward to the future, but not looking back on what has happened in the past.
So clearly she is taken with this book. I understand that you have talked with her about it.
Yeah, I've known Commissioner Taylor for quite a long time. She's been a dear friend for a long time. And she has a radio show, and she recently asked me to come on and talk about the book and talk about many of the things we're talking about here today. So I was very pleased and honored to do that with her.
Well, I know that we're going to have to go to a break in a few minutes, but as you tell the story, I mean, I'm just listening really just with rapt attention, and I know the story because you've shared it with me before, and I've certainly read the book. As we get ready to go into the break, how would you say you and your family fared after the relief came for Mount Meigs?
We did pretty well. I mean, I served a 15-day suspension of my job, and I finally got it back. Okay. And then we rocked along pretty well for a couple of years until we got into the second lawsuit, which was much more traumatic for us than the first one. But we managed to survive, and we did okay.
And so the lesson that you feel the children were taught, your children?
Well, I told them, and particularly tell adults, that children need protection, they need nurturing. They have no power of their own.
That's true. They
don't vote, they don't make campaign contributions. They really are powerless when it comes to adults who want to abuse them. Mm-hmm. Making sure that they're protected is everybody's responsibility. Absolutely. Whether you have children of your own or not, it's a collective adult responsibility that we all have to assume, and until we're ready to do that, many children will not be protected.
And that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. We do need to go to a break. I'll just say thank you, not only for sharing this story, but for the sacrifice. It was a sacrifice in many ways, and when we come back, you're going to tell us about this next level that you went to, as well as tell us a little bit more about how you spent your whole life, because this was actually only an early portion of your professional career. So when we come back, you'll get a chance to find out more about the man, more about the story at Mount Meigs, and maybe to reflect a little bit on the role that you can play in the lives of children who, like you say, have no voice if the adults don't care. Thank you. Don't go too far away.
Whether you have a pool or enjoy a day at the beach or time at the lake, constant supervision is what we need to do to protect our children from drowning. In the United States, drowning is the leading cause of accidental death to children under the age of 4. We recommend using layers of protection or barriers to the pools, such as extra door locks, door alarms, and pool fences. Visit our friends at floridasafepools.org.
Palm Beach County Fire Rescue's Community Assistance Team is committed to providing emotional support to our residents during their time of crisis.
Our team of volunteers dedicate themselves to the service of others. They take pride in the contribution they make to the community. These selfless individuals offer comfort where there is pain, and they give hope where there is despair.
If this sounds like you or someone you know and you want to help, call us. Palm Beach County Fire Rescue's Community Assistance Team, making a difference in your community.
Well, we're back, and the thing about being in a break with a friend is that you're still never really on break. During the break, you were sharing with us some information that really helped to kind of clarify the situation as it relates to advocacy. Can you share that with our viewers, Denny?
Well, there are two types of advocacy. One is called case advocacy, And that's when a third party takes some direct action to try to help an individual,
okay.
a child, an adult, somebody.
Okay.
The other kind of advocacy is called class advocacy, and that's when you do something that affects a whole range of people, a whole group of people. And generally you do that by changing policy, by changing laws, by changing procedures, okay. by doing things that ensure that everybody is treated fairly in the system.
And that's what you did.
That's what we
in the
did.
case of, okay.
And both lawsuits were class advocacy, class action lawsuits.
Okay. Tell us then about this next time, because one wasn't enough for you. you had to go stir up some more trouble. You thought you were finished, but the job wasn't quite done. How did that happen?
Well, in 1972, I was still in my job, and I was looking at the detention record of the kids that were in my facility, and there was a kid in there by the name of Emmett Player. And according to the records I was looking at, he had been at Mount Meigs for 5 years, but he was only 15. Okay. I knew that couldn't be true because you had to be at least 12 before you could be committed there, and the normal length of stay for a child was about a year or less. I'd never heard of anybody staying 5 years, but I knew something was wrong because it meant that he went there when he was 10 years old.
Right.
So I called the superintendent and I said, "What's this about Emmett Player that says he's been there for 5 years?" And he said, "He has." He said, "I don't know. He was here when I got here. I don't know anything about it." So I started, knowing me as you do, I started looking into why this was, and I found out that when Emmett was 10 years old, he lived in Birmingham with his mother, and his mother died. The authorities couldn't find anybody to take him. They couldn't find neighbors or relatives or friends or whatever. So they put this 10-year-old dependent child in a police car, drove him to an institution for delinquent children, no court order, no judicial oversight, no nothing, and dropped him off. And there he sat for 5 years, thoroughly institutionalized, in a place he didn't belong. His crime was he was 10 years old and he was dependent. And so I started trying to get him out of this place where he did not belong. And then I found out, and I really learned a lot about the child welfare system. Most of my work had been on the delinquency side, right. But there were homes for dependent children in Alabama who were primarily run by church groups. The Methodist Church had one, I think, in Selma. The Baptist Church had one, I believe, in Troy. The Presbyterian Church had one. The sheriffs had a boys' ranch. All of those facilities had signed the Civil Rights Compliance Act of 1964. They all had casework assistance from the state of Alabama. They all had tax-exempt status, and they refused to take this child because he was black. And I tried to get him admitted to each and every one of those, and they all refused.
Did they say because he was black?
Yes.
Or did they give you
no, they made no bones about it. Yeah, absolutely. So in 1972, I found another friend who was a lawyer.
Are these people still your friends then?
Yes. As a matter of fact, my second lawyer is now the board chair of the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Okay.
But his name is Howard Mandel, great guy. And we again knew that things had not changed that much in Alabama and we were going to get nowhere. So in 1972, we filed a second federal court class action lawsuit on behalf of Emmett and all children like him. And we sued all the Baptists and all the Presbyterians and all the Methodists and all the sheriffs.
It's not funny.
Well, as they say, unless you really know the Deep South, when you sue the Baptist Church in federal court, you have, as they say, bought the farm, which means you're in deep trouble.
You're in deep trouble.
I got fired for that. The Klan called my house and threatened me and threatened my family, and I couldn't get a job for about a year because nobody wanted to touch me. I went and interviewed for jobs all over the country that I was well qualified for. By then I had a master's degree from Florida State. And I went to some fairly progressive places, I thought. I went to Virginia, and I went to Newark, New Jersey, and I went to Texas, and I went to California. Wow. When they found out, here's a guy that sued his own state in federal courts, not once, but twice, I don't think we want to talk anymore with this guy. Wow. But nobody ever bothered to say, why did you do it? How did you try to avoid that? Did you try administrative relief? Right. What were the circumstances? So I went for a year without full employment. I had a friend that had a shop that re-chromed bumpers, and I delivered those for him, and I put up stock, and I cleaned his bathrooms, and I did whatever I could because I had a wife and 3 little kids. So it was a little hard there, and after a year of that, I was finally offered a position here in Florida, and that's what brought me to Florida in 1973.
Okay, wow, and here you are. Here you are. What happened in that case?
We won that case as well. We desegregated all those facilities. We got Emmett out of this institution, and here's the sequel to that. After we filed a lawsuit, then the state officials in Alabama got concerned, and they started checking into Emmett's condition. He had a father who was in a prison in Atmore, Alabama, so they would go up and interview the father. Emmett's father had a sister who was Emmett's paternal aunt, who lived in a little community called Sylacauga, Alabama, had a good home, was willing to take him, had not known where he had been for 5 years. And so she wanted him, he wanted to go there, and we got him discharged to his aunt's home. But
I keep thinking that you said in your story that the people where he lived tried to find relatives and couldn't. What did they do? Stand outside the house and just, does anybody know this?
Probably. That was in Birmingham. That was a different place from where his aunt lived. But, you know, they didn't try hard. They didn't care. You know, they had a kid here. They had to do something with him, so they dropped him off at an institution for delinquent kids. I mean, it was just a nightmare to think that somebody would do that to a child, and the state of Alabama would allow that.
And not be concerned until long after you'd won the case. And, of course, I can't help but think if there was one Emmett player, there had to be others.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that. I was talking to my writer, Doug Kalajian, who's a wonderful guy, and he's mostly responsible for this book. He is so talented and just got to the core of what I wanted to say. But I asked him one day, I said, Doug, there are 67 counties in Alabama, just like Florida has 67.
Right.
Why did Emmett Player have to wind up in my detention center in my county?
Right.
And he said, you know what, Denny? He was in other places. Our kids just like him. The only difference was nobody else cared.
Yeah, you were in
and he
this
said,
kind of
you weren't the only place. He was all over this state, and nobody cared.
How sobering is that? And as you sit at this stage in your life and look back, how does all of that impact you? What thoughts, what reflections do you have on that road that you've traveled?
I don't regret any of it. I would do it all over again. I think it's something that I felt was necessary. I think it was the right thing, the moral thing to do. I think some children are better off because of it, not as much as obviously we'd like. We still have child abuse around us every day.
Right.
But I know that I could not have lived with myself very well had I not done something.
And, you know, of course, in the time that I've known you, in the decades that I've known you, you're still speaking for people who have little or no voice. Talk to us a little bit about the career that you've had in Florida and in Palm Beach County.
Well, after I came to Florida, I worked in the juvenile justice system here for a number of years. And then I became director of a group in Fort Lauderdale called Child Advocacy. And we were advocating for children, doing class action kinds of stuff. And then in July of 1981, a 6-year-old boy by the name of Adam Walsh was abducted from a shopping mall in Hollywood, Florida, and murdered. After that, John and Reve, his parents, were getting ready to set up a nonprofit. And I called them and I said, we have a nonprofit organization. We're 501c3. We have a board of directors. And we had already started looking at this issue of missing and exploited children. So John Reve came on my board of directors, and we changed our name to the Adam Walsh Center. And so I was the national director of the Adam Walsh Center for Missing Children for 8 years and worked with John around the country trying to change laws for kids. And if we have time, I want to tell you one quick story. In 1983, we did a survey of people who were molesting kids in Florida. And we found pretty much what we thought we would. There were Little League coaches and Boy Scout leaders and others, mostly family members or someone the family knew. But the amazing thing was, in 1983, there were 40 occupations in Florida that required a federal criminal background check in order for you to work in that profession. You couldn't be an attorney or a doctor. You couldn't be a groom and rub a horse down at a racetrack in Florida without a federal background check. But you could be a convicted 3-time convicted child molester and get a job in a daycare center.
Wow.
And so we started looking at class advocacy in terms of changing laws for kids. People thought we had good laws for kids. We don't, again, because they had no lobby of their own.
Right.
And we started trying to change that, and we drafted 10 model pieces of legislation that John and I promoted around the country, trying to get states to take a look and say, we need to do a better job of protecting our children.
Wow. My goodness. Oh, good grief. I'm breathless just thinking about the work that you've done. What advice do you have for people that might be watching that themselves are advocating, especially on a class basis or even on a case basis? What encouragement do you give them, and maybe precautions would you share? Because I know you speak and you share some of this information to groups and organizations, but just for our viewers' sake, be on the safe side and be prepared for this, and then encourage them to do what?
The important thing is to make sure that you know what you're talking about and do your homework.
Okay.
And that requires a lot of time and effort. But you can't go out and make a case and find out that your assumptions were wrong.
Okay.
You have to know exactly what you're dealing with. And then you have to go to people that can help you. In our case, it was not administrators or white administrators. It was federal court judges. But we knew that. I mean, that's where we took our case. We weren't going to waste our time going into state court. It was a total waste of time. Right. So know who can help you. Go to that person, and just don't give up. Never give up.
Well, from the man who didn't give up, let's make sure that we know how people can get in touch with you should they want you to come and speak, or also to purchase this book. We're going to have that information up on the screen. And in a minute or so, where do we go from here, Denny? What's up next?
Well, I'm retired now. I'm 73 years old.
God bless you.
And I just retired this past November. And I thought that my retirement was going to be a life of leisure, and I would, sit back and have nothing to do. Here I am doing a TV show today, and I've got like 5 speaking engagements set up. So the book has taken a lot of time, but right. we think it's worth it, and we've gotten a lot of requests for more information about it, so we're going to be spending a lot of time with that.
Well, once again, on behalf of everyone here and in our community, I thank you for your service, because you have been living a life of service, and you still are. And I would say that anybody can read They Had No Voice, and they can get it. They definitely, it's an easy read, it's a compelling read, and it'll have you in tears, absolute tears. Thank you so much for taking time to join us. Thank you also for joining us. Get a hold of this book. Understand that where we are today is not where we have been, and where we are today is not where we need to go. Thanks. Have yourself a good one.